F22 M240i offers the best of both modern and classic BMW. It has a front-engine rear-drive chassis, a 3-litre turbocharged straight-six, and restrained and refined styling, and can offer you sports car level performance for hot hatch money.
Let's get going. Car's nice and warm now, which is good. I love this thing. So let's talk about the car. 2017 BMW M240i manual. My previous car was also a BMW F22, but it was the 230i, so it had the 2-litre 4-cylinder. That was an epic car, it really was. So much faster than it needed to be, so much more serious and grown up. But it didn't sound like this. Yes, so for me, I've always grown up having manual cars, and it's just what I think performance driving should be all about. This car, as it comes out of the factory, it's a great car, or a great base for modification.
The motor itself is the familiar B58. In this, guys, it produces 340 horsepower and 370 pound-feet of torque, though those figures might be underrated.
And it just makes torque to spare. We're in the UK, temperatures are about 10 degrees, but the roads are greasy. Yeah, this car is just so slippery and slidey in these conditions. It's so much fun. Obviously, yes, you need to know what you're doing as a driver, and you need to respect the car to a sufficient degree, but as long as you operate within its parameters and you're conscious of what you have, the car is lovely. So this car, the M240i, it really is a great car for, I'd say, intermediate to experienced drivers, purely because of the power and the lack of the limited slip differential. You really do need to know what you're doing as a driver if you're going to be, safe in this car when driving it in a sporting sort of manner. Also with the stability systems dialed back a little bit. What I really like though is that the traction control as standard is actually really, really well judged. So if you're able to drive the car to a point whereby you feel the intervention kicking in, but otherwise the car is balanced and you're carrying speed through and it's just a little bit of rotation that you need, I'd say step up into the sport mode or the sport plus mode, where it kind of puts the traction and stability into a half on mode. If you're really comfortable, particularly if you're on track, I would say go ahead and go straight into DSC off, see how you get on, but only once you're comfortable with the car. It's a car that I'd say, as they come, they can be a little bit vague when you're really starting to push towards the limit, and it can be uncertain whether the front is going to push into an understeer or whether the rear end is going to slide into an oversteer. So what have I done to my car? What are the changes that I've made to make this the perfect M240i for me? So the first modification, or the first upgrade, I would say, that I did to the car was a limited slip differential. Now, if you don't know what a limited slip diff is, fundamentally, it's something that during hard cornering and hard acceleration allows power to be distributed evenly to both of the back wheels. What that means is, if you're driving the car straight and precise, you get clean getaways from corners, basically. You can put down more of the power earlier and really get on the car in a way that gives you drive out of the corner and lets you press on. It stops that distracting sort of confusion that you can get with the open diff, where it gets a bit scrappy, it gets a bit snappy, and it keeps it so much more stable and planted. It really is lovely. It's actually the first modification that I made to the car, and as I said, I used to own a 230i before this, and I'd say that car, it would have benefited from a diff, but it was actually quite good without it. It never got scrappy. It could always manage and deal with the torque that 250 horsepower B58 engine could provide. This car, it's a bit of a different story. The electronics aren't sophisticated enough to deal with what this engine is putting out. So you really do need that diff. In the first 3 weeks that I had the car, I drove it with all the systems fully turned on, and even then you could feel the back end shifting and doing different things, and it was just quite a disconcerting feeling from an otherwise, you know, driver focused performance car. And that really is the shortcoming of this car and the Achilles heel. I'd say that all of the other changes that I've made to the car are just, if you really want to take it that far, or at least make a proper driver's car out of the M240i, you would need the other mods. But really, if you're just going to do one, do the diff, be happy, lay black lines down everywhere. Whoa, a bit slippery today, guys. So, what are the other changes that I've made to the car? So the next modification that I made to the car was to fit the slightly wider and lower offset wheels that it's currently running on. Now, effectively, this is the same as putting a spacer onto the car, but it's slightly different with the specs that I chose for both the front and rear. So effectively, the car at that time was running a 10mm wider track at the front, and I believe it was around a 30mm wider or 35mm, 34mm wider track at the rear. And what that really means is on the front axle you get less weight transfer on turning, it feels a bit more stable and planted, and more positive as a result when you're steering through the corner. At the rear axle, the change that it made was actually providing a lot more stability when pushing the car and really trying to get that rear end to rotate. So now when the car does go into a slide, that it doesn't feel like or at least at the time, it didn't feel like the rear end was heaving over as much. It felt far stiffer once you're at that lateral limit of grip. Yeah, I really enjoyed that upgrade. Surprisingly, because I'll be honest with you, I mainly did it for cosmetic reasons. I knew there would be a mechanical benefit to it, but it was largely a cosmetic mod. And yeah, I was really happy with the results. Can't recommend it enough. One thing that I did do is the front tyre is still the stock 225/40 R18 tyre. It's just over a wider rim now. It's now over a 8.5 inch wide wheel. So what that does is it actually, I wouldn't say it stretches the front tyre, it puts the front tyre under tension. And what that does is it just gives you a little bit more steering precision and response. Just nothing major, just as you're turning in. But also I think you get a little bit of feedback back as a result. And actually, because of how it presses the tread on the ground, you get a slightly wider contact patch as well. Slightly wider wheels on the same tyre width will do that. So slight benefit in contact patch there, more front end grip, good stuff. On the rear axle, I did change the tyre size, but I didn't go any wider, just because the fitment's quite aggressive. I didn't think I'd get away with any more. But it's a 245/40 R18 up from a 245/35 R18. And the difference that has made is that you've got a bit more sidewall, so you've actually got a little bit more compression and compliance when the car goes over bumps, and you've just got more traction as a result. It was the main thing that I noticed. It took more effort to get the rear end to break loose. It'll do it in the right conditions, as you've seen, but when you're driving the car straight, it means you have more communication and more time to respond to when that rear end is going to break loose. The next modification that I made was the MSS springs. Now this was a really great mod actually, because to be honest, paired with the wider wheels, it just had more of the same effect. You know, more control over the body and how it rolls on the suspension when you're cornering and when you're, you know, letting the rear end move around. There was less weight transfer when going into slides and into oversteer, and also during hard cornering, which just means that you're more confident to make those kind of moves when you're out on the road. The car just feels a lot more direct and responsive, and yeah, it just sort of compounded on the effects that the wider wheels had, to be honest. The next upgrade is my second favourite upgrade after the diff. It was the M3 and M4 and M2 front lower control arms and tension struts, and it makes a massive difference. I say for value for money, it's even better than the diff in terms of the driving experience, because what it does to the front axle of the car is commensurate to what it does to the rear axle of the car, in that you get so much more feedback and control and consistency. You've seen how I've been letting the car move around and kind of slide. If you just relax on the wheels and the steering, it's so easy to control, it's easy to manage, you get a ton more feedback, and you do get one degree of an extra degree of negative camber. So the car jumps up from about 0.5, 0.6 to about 1.5, 1.6. But really, the main difference that gives you all of the feel and all of the control is the caster. So I don't know by how much the caster increases with these control arms and tension struts, but what I do know is that you get a ton more feedback when you're pushing on. Before, where the car felt a little bit vague on turning, the steering just wakes up and you just get the most delicious smooth steering feel. And then when the car does go over the limit and into a drift, it's just, you steer into the slide, but you can feel by how much you need to steer into the slide just from the weighting of the wheel as the car rotates. And then you counter steer, get the lock on, and once you get to that point of equalization, it will just not lighten up, it will still be under tension, but you know that the car is pointing in the direction that it should be. Now, the last modification that I've made to this car, well, it's actually a pair of modifications. I put the Bilstein dampers to go with the MSS springs, put those on the car, along with the stiffer rear subframe inserts, the Black Series ones from Powerflex. And yeah, that made a huge difference to the way this car feels. Much like going up on the tyre size on the rear axle, again, it's just that kind of effect whereby you have more contact with the road more of the time, therefore you have more grip. And the damping, what I think they've done is they've actually increased the low speed damping, which is the sort of weight transfer that you get as you turn into a corner, and the body, you know, leans over to handle those cornering forces. So that damping's actually gone up, so the car is even more stable and even more planted in those scenarios. But the high speed damping, they've softened it off a little bit, and what that means is when the car goes over a sudden compression that you'd get with a pothole or a bump or just uneven surfaces, the car is actually softer in those instances, which means that the car can just maintain that contact patch on the road. Far smoother, far more controllable, and also it imbues the car with a sense of precision to the way that it goes down the road. There's a deftness, there's a delicacy to the way the car goes down the road now, not even including the cornering, just the way that it flows and breathes with the road. It's just so much better. The dampers that I've got on this car are just the standard Bilstein B8 dampers. You can get ones that go beyond that will do better things, and also you can get B8s and B6s that are built to other companies' specifications. From what others have reported about those, I would say that the changes that just the standard B8s make to the car are consistent. I've had the car out on track, and you can definitely feel it's a road car out there. This is no, race car. It's not an M car. I think that perhaps it's somewhere in between the two. But what that does give this car is the control and confidence that you need to push on track, but also the comfort and usability to still drive it every day. And up until recently, this was my everyday car, my only car.
Though the M240i and M235i that preceded it were celebrated when new for offering such a bargain when you considered price against performance, both cars were criticised for being incomplete sports cars that felt as though BMW had left so much sitting on the table. As a used prospect, however, these cars represent a unique opportunity for enthusiasts to pick up where BMW left off by upgrading the cars in a few key areas to elevate their performance to a whole new level. I want to be clear, however, this is not an M car. Those cars are engineered to a far higher standard and possess far more ability. Though for road use and light track work, I think you can have a lot of fun here. The upgrades, however, give the car so much more control and finesse and imbue the car with the handling characteristics you'd expect of a BMW. Last time I checked, those were great even before the M cars rolled around.